Hello and welcome to our special edition of Arirang News. French President Emmanuel Macron is currently in South Korea for the first time since taking office in 2017, making him the first French leader to visit Seoul in 11 years. Now, in just a few moments, we will bring you live coverage of the official welcoming ceremony ahead of his summit with President Lee Jae-myung. Now, while we wait for that to begin, we're joined today by Dr. Dylan Motang, visiting scholar at the Seoul National University Asia Center. Dr. Motang, thanks for coming on today.
Very happy to be here.
So could you just tell us more about the significance of President Macron's visit and why now, given that he's set to leave office in about a year?
So this visit has been in the making for actually a very long time. If you remember, President Yoon Suk-yeol went to Paris actually 2 times to meet with Macron. And the tradition is that when you meet with a leader in a foreign country, this leader should come back to your country to make a payback visit, right? But as you remember, there was this self-coup issue in December 2024, and then all the impeachment process, and after that, the presidential election, which pushed back everything back in the future. At the same time, Macron had been very busy with organizing the Olympic Games in France, and there was a political crisis when he dissolved the assembly last year. So because of all of these factors, it was very hard to make the trip before that. And this year, because of the anniversary, was the perfect occasion to do it. And perhaps on a more political level, Macron now is in a very tough spot in France. He's quite unpopular, and the presidential elections are coming next year. So if he wants a candidate from his party to have a standing chance to win the election, he needs to bring as much results as quick as possible. And I think that coming to South Korea to get investments back in France is part of his strategy.
I see. And how do you see both leaders addressing the tensions in the Middle East right now?
I would say that both share the same point of view. So, of course, they are very worried of a major disruption of oil supply and the current spike in oil prices. And also both Macron and Lee are afraid that US attention is being distracted away from core interests like the war in Ukraine, in Europe, of the North Korean issue for South Korea. So both of them would like to shut down this war as soon as possible. And to do that, they have to be very careful because they will try, I think, at the same time to encourage negotiation, but not to anger President Trump, who is already quite mad at both France and South Korea for not intervening more in the war. So they will have to walk this very tightrope to avoid both angering Trump, which is the key ally, and also to end the war as soon as possible.
Right. I'm glad you actually mentioned that because President Trump has been criticizing France for closing its airspace, and he's been also sort of lashing out at other European allies too. And he said they aren't doing enough around the Strait of Hormuz. So how should countries like South Korea and France respond to this claim?
Just to be clear, France has not totally shut down military flights. It was more of an isolated incident, which Trump picked on. So France right now is in talks with Great Britain, with Germany, with India, and a few others to create a coalition to try to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But it's not really clear what it will mean and whether it will be some kind of diplomatic maneuver or some kind of military show of force. So there's no good strategy right now. And as I said, both countries are really worried not to anger Trump and not to give him an excuse to restart the trade war, not to put an end to the agreements already signed recently. So I think that both of them will be very attentive not to vocally take position against Trump.
Right. And, Trump, speaking of that, Trump has been hitting out at European allies over this war. And some analysts say that this growing resistance from NATO allies express sort of a deepening division within the alliance. So given that NATO is already under strain over issues like Ukraine and Greenland, how do you think the future of NATO will turn out?
So the crisis, in a way, reminds me of what happened in Iraq in 2003 when the US decided to attack Iraq alone. But the difference this time is that there was almost no consultation prior to the war. And as you mentioned, the European allies, I think, will have shown to many Americans some kind of disloyalty. That's how the Americans will perceive it in the waging of this war. So my belief is that the NATO will survive, and even if Trump has talked about exiting NATO, there's a lot of legal hurdles. You cannot just exit like this. It's not like signing an executive order. He has to go for the Congress. And a lot of Republican congressmen and all the neoconservative current will be opposed to such a move. So I do believe that NATO will survive, but relations within NATO will become far more transactional and conditional than before. And I do expect US to really ramp up the pressure about the issue of burden sharing and asking the European allies to do much more to ensure the defense of the eastern borders of NATO.
Right. Especially since Trump is very much focused on burden sharing, and he's been also pressuring South Korea to take more of those burdens as for the cost needed for stationing U.S. troops in Korea, right?
Yes. I don't expect the same way. I don't expect Trump to somehow just end the Korean alliance just because of the war in Iran. Korea is too important for that. But after the war ends, you will have for sure a very angry Trump who will ask Korea to do a lot more, both for South Korea but also for Taiwan.
Right.
It's something that the Americans are very worried about. So you can expect a lot of pressure on South Korea to take a much more open stance on the issue of the defense of Taiwan.
Right, and speaking of the Middle East, President Trump actually delivered an address yesterday, and he said American forces will finish the job pretty soon and that the United States is going to hit Iran extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So does this mean he's determined to escalate the war for the next few weeks?
For sure, it seems so. Donald Trump right now has not been able to achieve the foremost objective, which was to get rid of the Iranian regime. So now he is contemplating a ground operation. So it's not really clear what it would mean. It could be an operation to take control of the Strait of Hormuz directly. It could be an operation to take control of some Iranian islands. Or also it could be some kind of a raid to take control of Iran's uranium, which had been buried underground since last year and the war with Israel. So in any case, if we are talking about a ground operation, it could prolong this war for many weeks, and I'm afraid perhaps for months, actually.
We just talked about burden sharing, and Trump says Seoul has not been helpful to Washington despite the presence of American troops on the Korean Peninsula. And he talked about how American troops are close to what he called a nuclear threat, apparently referring to North Korea. So how should South Korea respond to this claim?
The best thing is actually not to respond, because Trump, as we know with the last few years, is someone which you want to try to smoothen with praises and compliments, isn't it?
Right.
So the best thing would be not to pick up on Trump's comments and just to wait for the storm to pass. And I do believe that actually President Lee Jae-myung could, in the long term, get some kind of benefits from this war. Because after the war, the US president will be in a quite tough spot, because he would have failed to realize many of his objectives. And the midterm elections are still coming very soon.
Right.
So he will want to get any kind of success abroad. So it could be an occasion for Lee Jae-myung to maybe try to push his agenda of engagement with North Korea so Trump can at least look like he's having some success in Asia.
I see. And going back to Macron's visit, what are some other key bilateral issues they might likely focus on in today's talks?
First of all, economics. I'm sure that both Macron and Lee Jae-myung are quite eager to get investments from the other side.
Right.
Also, there are some lingering trade tensions. For instance, I'm aware that some Korean companies have been complaining to the Korean government about French policies of subsidizing electric vehicles purchased in France, because they consider that some of these measures are quite detrimental to South Korean cars, which would contradict the EU-Korea free trade agreement. Another issue would be Ukraine. I would guess that President Macron will, on the behalf of Ukraine, try to secure perhaps some ammunition supply for Ukraine, or perhaps also try to get some kind of economic aid or Korean investment into Ukraine to support Ukraine's war effort. And when it comes to Lee Jae-myung, I would think that he would be eager to engage with Macron about North Korea, because after all, France is a UN permanent member state, so it still has some importance. And actually, France hasn't shown much interest into the North Korean issue, so he will want to get Macron on board, I believe.
Right. On the screen, we now see President Lee Jae-myung ready to greet President Macron, who will soon be arriving at the Blue House. And you just mentioned that economic ties will be at the highlight of talks in today's talks. And I'm hearing that President Macron will actually be holding separate meetings with executives from Korean companies like Samsung, Hyundai Motor, and Naver. What can we expect to happen there, and how have economic ties between these two countries evolved so far?
So when it comes to the companies you mentioned, it comes within the frame of Macron's strategy of re-industrializing France. So he has in mind to make France the European hub for green technology and also for AI. And when he was in Japan earlier, he actually got some Japanese companies to invest into France. Actually, Samsung already agreed to increase its research investment in France, which soon will become one of Samsung's major research hub abroad. When it comes to Hyundai, I do believe he will try to get some cooperation on electric vehicle production, and especially battery, because Macron has been building what some people like to call a battery valley in northern France, to really try to make France this kind of electric battery hub in Europe. And finally, for Naver, he will want to get Naver's expertise and investments into French AI, because France wants to develop its own sovereign AI, not to depend too much on American technology.
That's exactly what Korea is working on as well, right?
Exactly, that's why he wants South Korea's help.
Right.
And just to come back to your question about economic relations, overall, the relationship is very healthy, I would say. And the trade between the two countries is very balanced in terms of imports and exports. But Macron would like to recalibrate the relationship away from the traditional model of buyer and seller, and more toward a model of equal cooperation in terms of technology and the next generation industries.
Right. And another issue they might discuss in today's talks is nuclear energy, right? Especially since South Korea and France competed fiercely to win a Czech nuclear power plant contract recently. And we see President Macron now getting ready to meet with President Lee Jae-myung, right? Right, they just met at the Blue House. We see President Lee Jae-myung greeting President Macron. So we see them now shaking hands. The First Lady also greeting President Macron. So how might, back to their their summit, another issue they might focus on is nuclear energy. How might Seoul and Paris seek to work together in this field?
You could imagine some increased cooperation when it comes to academic exchanges, notably the training of the next generation of nuclear engineers, perhaps in France. You could imagine more cooperation in terms of fundamental nuclear research. But overall, I'm quite pessimistic. I do believe that France and Korea are competing for the same markets, and their needs are not complementary. So I do believe that in this sphere, at least, competition will prevail. But one sphere you could imagine some kind of big announcement is when it comes to nuclear submarines. You know that South Korea has been lately working on the next program for nuclear propelled attack submarines. So that's one area where South Korea could ask for French expertise to try to get access to French engine technology, which in many ways is cheaper and easier to operate than American engines.
I see. Right, and we now see on the screen President Lee Jae-myung and President Macron standing side by side. This is their third in-person meeting, right, after they met on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Canada and the G20 summit in South Africa last year. So this is their third time meeting, right?
Yes, and I think they already have some kind of a good relationship. They already appreciate each other, and they both recognize the other as some kind of a defender of liberal democracy, both in their own countries and abroad. So I would say there's already some kind of a trust and a good friendship among them.
Right. And as for these two countries' diplomatic relations, this year actually marks 140 years since South Korea and France established diplomatic ties, right? How might today's talk sort of help advance this bilateral relations moving forward?
So beyond what we mentioned already, one issue where you could have some more progress is about cultural relationships. So in recent years, due to all what we know about the Korean wave and the growing interest into Korean language in France, French public education has been investing a lot of efforts into growing the Korean study departments in France. But there's a feeling in France that this is not being reciprocated, because in South Korea, the study of French language is in decline. Barely any Korean students now learn French in high school, and the French departments in universities are emptying out, actually. So there's a sense among French diplomats that we could ask Korea to do a bit more, to have a more balanced relationship. So it's not only France promoting Korean culture, but also maybe Korea trying to promote French language and culture.
I see. Right, so now we just heard the national anthem of both of these two countries, and They will soon hold summit talks, followed by signing of MOUs and a joint press conference in the afternoon. Now, to just give you a brief overview, President Macron arrived in Seoul on a two-day visit yesterday ahead of summit talks with President Lee Jae-myung scheduled for today. And this marks his first visit to South Korea since taking office in 2017. And upon arrival yesterday, Macron paid tribute at the War Memorial of Korea to honor French troops who fought in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. So Dr. Motang, France has invited President Lee Jae-myung to the G7 Leaders Summit in June, right? What's the significance of this invitation, and what might South Korea be aiming for if it does decide to attend this event?
So on the French side, it is clearly an acknowledgement that South Korea has become a key partner on all issues of economy and security, and also an acknowledgement of South Korea's status of advanced democracy. When it comes to South Korea, attending such a summit is always an occasion to meet with all the key world leaders at the same time. So it's really a time-saving measure because you can discuss all the issues very quickly with all your peers. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that Lee Jae-myung would be interested also to try to push an agenda of engaging with North Korea during such a summit. Mm-hmm. And South Korea has had for some time this ambition of actually becoming a member and turning the G7 into perhaps one day a G8. So I'm not sure it could happen this time, but participating is a good way to try to increase South Korea's status to achieve that in the long run. On the more political side of things, for a Korean president to attend such an event is always a very interesting boost in popularity and a way to show that he is actually a popular world leader. So there's only benefits for Lee Jae-myung to attend.
Mm-hmm. I see. And you talked about how cultural relationship has played a key part in relations between South Korea and France. And the Blue House actually said yesterday gifts for the First Lady of France also included a set of tableware as well as signed albums of renowned K-pop artists like BTS and Stray Kids. So I guess K-pop, the Korean culture like K-pop and K-dramas are pretty popular in France too, right?
Of course. I can even testify that when I was in university, you had very few chances to learn Korean. But now almost every major French university has a department of Korean, and the number of students has increased like several times in the last few years. So the interest into Korean culture is for now still quite limited to very young people, we must say so, but it has been exploding, and actually France is one of the foremost markets for K-pop products in Europe.
I see, that's impressive. And like we just discussed, Macron's visit comes as the South Korea and France mark their 140th anniversary of diplomatic ties. After they established formal ties in 1886, that's when the Treaty of Friendship, Commerce and Navigation was signed between France and the Joseon dynasty back in 1886. So how might today's summit talks help advance this diplomatic and bilateral relations?
So just to give you like a brief overview, so the relationship between France and Korea didn't really start on a good standing because there was this episode when actually France did invade Korean territory, especially Gangwon Island. And France was perceived back then as a threatening colonial power by South Korea. And actually, when Japanese colonization came, France didn't really do much to try to support Korea. So there was this kind of resentment about France back then. And now Macron is building onto the Cold War history of France's participation into the Korean War. to try to elicit sympathy from Korean people, and as we mentioned, to try to get both successes in terms of cultural policy, but most importantly for him, in terms of investments.
Right, right. And we now see President Lee Jae-myung and Macron shaking hands with officials from both sides. So, Dr. Motang, not just diplomatic issues, but economic issues, like you mentioned, trade and investment, will also be on the agenda in today's talks, right?
Oh, yes, not only on the agenda, but there will be, I think, key and central to everything. The situation in both countries in terms of growth actually is not that good, I should say, actually for France. And France has a structural issue of unemployment. So Macron is trying very hard to pull all levers to have foreign investors come to France and build factories in France. So it has been starting since his predecessor François Hollande, but France has been trying to offer more advantageous tax conditions for foreign companies. And Macron personally has been in talks with people like Elon Musk and key US CEOs to get them to move into France. So you can expect the same here. It will go very hard to have Korean companies move into France.
Right, and you talked about how Samsung is planning to build a research hub there in France. So a lot of Korean companies are looking to expand to the French market, right?
Yes. There's a few reasons for that. One, which I just mentioned, because of this attempt to become more competitive, France is actually becoming relatively interesting to invest in because unlike 10 or 20 years ago, it has become relatively more affordable to invest in France than to invest in Germany, for instance. And also many countries in Central and Eastern Europe have this issue of energy supply because they are reliant on gas or coal to produce their energy. But France is mostly a nuclear-powered country, so energy too is quite cheap. And this is important when you work into AI, or if you want to build a data center or something like that. So it is more attractive in terms of labor, in terms of energy. On a geographical standpoint, it's easier to come from South Korea to France in a ship than to go all the way to the northern seaports of the Netherlands or even Germany. So it has a very central geographic position, which is very interesting to export into Europe.
Right. That's exactly why it makes the France so attractive market for Korean companies, right?
Yeah.
So now that was our live coverage of the official welcoming ceremony ahead of the summit talks between President Lee Jae-myung and French President Emmanuel Macron. So, Dr. Motang, we just saw President Lee and Macron meet at the Blue House, where they will hold a summit talk soon. How do you think the talks will play out today?
Very well. We mentioned that they both know each other, so there shouldn't be any major surprise. And you know that these talks are always prepared a long time in advance.
Right.
So the most important issues have already been agreed upon. So I think it's just a way to announce them together. I do not expect any major announcement or something which we didn't expect. So once again, I will come back to this. A few announcements about investments, perhaps some issues of cultural cooperation, perhaps some announcements on the Korean side to do more to remember the participation of French soldiers into the Korean War. But beyond that, I don't expect much public announcement. I think the real meet will be actually discussed in private, Ukraine, North Korea, how to react about the war in Iran and Trump.
Right, a lot on the agenda, and we'll have to see how that plays out. All right, Dr. Mote, thank you so much for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
U.S. President Donald Trump has confirmed a U.S. airstrike that destroyed a major bridge near Tehran, warning there would be more to follow if a settlement is not reached. But Iran vowed to fight back and said strikes on civilian infrastructure would not force Tehran to surrender. Our Kim Bo-kyung has the details.
A day after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age, he claimed responsibility for destroying Iran's largest bridge. Trump published footage showing the under-construction bridge between Tehran and Karaj collapsing on Thursday local time and warned there would be more to follow if a settlement is not reached. He added that Iran must come to the negotiating table before it is too late and before any chance of becoming a great nation again is completely gone. 8 people were killed and 95 wounded in the airstrike on the bridge, according to the Iranian media. In response to the attack, the Iranian military designated 8 bridges located in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Jordan as potential targets for retaliation. And Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted on X saying strikes on civilian infrastructure would not force Iran to surrender, but only convey the defeat and moral collapse of an enemy in disarray. The strike on Iran's largest bridge comes after Trump addressed at the White House on Thursday, where he warned Washington will intensify strikes over Tehran with extreme force for over the next 2 to 3 weeks, making it go back to the Stone Age. Meanwhile, diplomats from more than 40 countries, including South Korea, held a virtual meeting on Thursday where they agreed to explore using sanctions to pressure Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The representatives strongly condemned Iran for hijacking the international maritime route and holding the global economies hostage. They agreed to increase pressure through the UN and come up with sanctions to bear down on Iran if the strait remains closed. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Iran is moving to tighten oversight of the Strait of Hormuz with the drafting of a new joint navigation regime with Oman. The move comes as Iran claimed to struck U.S.-linked steel and aluminum facilities across the Middle East. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Iran is moving closer to introducing a new system to oversee maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for global energy supplies. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Qasem Gharibabadi said Thursday that Tehran has nearly completed the first draft of a new navigation regime, which would be implemented in coordination with Oman. Under the proposal, Iran and Oman would jointly supervise ship movements through the strait. Iranian officials say the plan is designed to ensure safe passage and improve services for vessels, not to impose restrictions. Still, the move could expand Tehran's influence over one of the world's most strategically important shipping routes, which handles a significant share of global oil and gas flows. Traffic through the strait has already declined sharply amid the ongoing conflict involving Iran, the United States, and Israel, prompting some countries to consider alternative routes. Meanwhile, tensions are escalating beyond the waterway. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said Thursday it carried out attacks on U.S.-linked steel and aluminum facilities across the Middle East. According to Iranian state media, the strikes are part of what Tehran calls the 90th phase of Operation True Promise, targeting sites tied to American capital and technology. Possible locations include facilities in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, as the extent of the damage has not been independently confirmed. The reported attacks come as 2 of Iran's largest steel producers halted operations following repeated airstrikes by the U.S. and Israel last week. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Washington announced a new tariff policy on Thursday with a flat 25% duty on products containing significant amounts of steel, aluminum, or copper. The change replaces the previous system, which applied tariffs of up to 50% based on metal content. The new rule instead applies a uniform rate to the total price of finished goods. The measure is expected to affect South Korean exporters of home appliances, including washing machines and refrigerators. President Trump signed a proclamation formalizing the policy, which targets products with metal content above 15% by weight. Products with 15% or less will be exempt from the tariff. On the local front, President Lee Jae-myung delivered a budget speech to the National Assembly on Thursday and urged lawmakers to fast-track a supplementary budget to mitigate the economic fallout from the Middle East conflict. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin reports.
President Lee Jae-myung says the government's more than $17 billion supplementary budget kept this in mind.
위기일수록 사회적 약자를 더 두텁게 보호해야 한다는 원칙과 경제 회생의 골든타임을 놓치지 않겠다는 각오 아래 총 26조 2천억 원 규모의 추가 경정 예산안을 마련했습니다.
Delivering a budget speech at the National Assembly on Thursday, President Lee described the spending plan as one that makes bold investments where they are most needed in response to the Middle East crisis, while minimizing the burden on households and businesses.
이번 추경안은 국채를 발행하지 않는 빚 없는 추경이라는 점을 분명하게 말씀드립니다. 정시 반도체 경기 호황 등에 따른 초과 세수 25조 2천억 원과 기금 자체 재원 1조를 활용할 계획입니다.
The extra budget focuses on easing the burden on consumers and businesses affected by rising oil prices, with more than 10 trillion won allocated for this. A key measure is direct cash support for some 36 million people, the bottom 70% of income earners.
소득 수준과 지역 우대 원칙에 따라 1인당 기본 10만 원에서 최대 60만 원까지 차등 지원하겠습니다. 지원금은 지역 화폐로 지급하여 지역과 골목 상권의 소상공인 자영업자에게 도움이 되고 경기 활성화에도 기여할 수 있도록 설계하였다.
President Lee also outlined plans to expand financial support for small business owners and compensate those affected by the oil price cap. Looking further ahead, he pledged to increase financing for renewable energy to reduce South Korea's heavy reliance on fossil fuels. Wrapping up his more than 15-minute address, Lee urged bipartisan support to ensure the bill's swift passage, saying that overcoming a crisis depends on speed. The National Assembly is set to review the budget next week before putting it to a vote at a plenary session. The ruling and opposition parties previously agreed to pass it by next Friday. 송유진, Arirang News.
The global recognition of Hangang's We Do Not Part at the National Book Critics Circle Awards has renewed international attention to the historical tragedy at the heart of the novel, the Jeju 4-3 incident in 1948, marking a meaningful encounter with its English translator ahead of the commemoration. Our Cho Young-eun tells us more.
The growing recognition of the Hangang novel We Do Not Part marks a significant moment, as it is one of the first Korean literary works to introduce the Jeju 4-3 incident to a broad international readership. Translator Paige-Ania Morris spoke about the meaning of conveying this history to readers around the world and the significance of the Jeju 4-3 incidents from a translator's perspective.
I think part of the translation work is also kind of joining the writer in this mission of making sure that these stories are not erased, or they don't continue to be erased and they don't end up forgotten.
The Jeju 4-3 incident dates back to 1948, when protests against the division of the Korean peninsula were met with a brutal crackdown by military and police forces, resulting in the death of around 30,000 people, more than 10% of Jeju's population at the time. Morris explains that through the novel, American readers have begun to challenge the notion that such events are distant.
Seeing that readers are connecting it to their own lives and also just having a lot of empathy for what happened on Jeju, I think it's really powerful, and it speaks to just how connected we all are.
She added that translating the story for a global audience presents unique challenges, as many readers may not immediately understand certain terms. She explained that the translation sought to convey certain meanings as clearly as possible, since some terms are often unfamiliar not only to international readers, but even to many Koreans today.
At the time that I first encountered any mention of this incident, I was honestly afraid to look further into it and kind of afraid of what I would learn and what I would see.
Her process involved extensive archival research, including reviewing video footage and articles mentioned in the novel, in order to vividly bring those scenes to life. Moore says she has been both happy and humbled by the global response to the novel, particularly the positive reception among English-speaking readers.
incredible world of Hangang's writing, a lot of her writing dealing with these historical moments that would otherwise have been kind of forgotten or swept aside or covered up or kind of limited just to Korean readers.
조영은 아리랑 뉴스.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. U.S. President Donald Trump has fired Attorney General Bondi. The sacking ends a tenure marked by controversy over the Jeffrey Epstein files and growing White House frustration over what Trump saw as Bondi's failure to move fast enough against his political opponents. Trump on Thursday appointed former personal lawyer and current Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche as acting Attorney General. He praised Bondi in a social media post as a great American patriot while announcing her move to the private sector. Bondi's firing follows months of tensions as Trump repeatedly told her he was unhappy with her performance. The Epstein files drove the final blow. After the Justice Department declared the case closed in July and released roughly 3 million pages, bipartisan backlash forced a new law requiring near total disclosure, but lawmakers continued to slam redactions. Bondi was set to testify before the House Oversight Committee on April 14th. In the latest purge of the Pentagon's senior leadership, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has fired Army Chief of Staff General Randy George, cutting short a 4-year term with more than a year remaining. The Pentagon on Thursday confirmed George's immediate retirement with no explanation. This comes despite thousands of U.S. Army soldiers from the elite 82nd Airborne Division being deployed to the Middle East for operations against Iran. General Christopher Leneve, Hegseth's former military aide and current Army Vice Chief of Staff, steps in as acting Army Chief. George's removal is part of a sweeping shakeup Hegseth has driven across all Pentagon leadership levels, including the firings of Joint Chiefs Chairman, the Chief of Naval Operations, and the Air Force Vice Chief of Staff. The UN Security Council is set to vote Friday on a resolution led by Bahrain to protect commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, where the traffic has all but halted due to conflict with Iran. Diplomats say the measure would authorize all defensive means necessary, though China and Russia have voiced strong opposition. China's UN envoy warned that any authorization of force would lead to further escalation. Bahrain's foreign minister urged a unified council response, calling Iran's control of navigation code unlawful and unjustified. The strait has been effectively closed to commercial traffic since the U.S. and Israel began strikes on Iran in late February, which caused a surge in global oil prices. NASA's Artemis II crew received clearance on Thursday to fire its engines, leave the Earth's orbit, and head for the moon. But before that, they had to repair the Orion's capsule's malfunctioning toilet. Astronaut Christina Koch led the repair after the so-called lunar loo failed to work. They now head for a lunar fly-around, which will be the first human trip around the moon since Apollo 17 in 1972.
Streets are now lined with fully bloomed cherry blossoms, painting everything in soft shades of pink. But if you're heading out to enjoy them, make sure to keep a face mask handy. Ultrafine dust levels are forecast to be in a bad range in most parts of Korea, with western regions forecast to see persistent dust all day today. And you may want to plan your outing sooner rather than later. Rain is on the way nationwide from tonight through tomorrow afternoon. Rain will start from Jeju this evening, and it could come down heavily in southern parts of Korea. Jeju Island and South Coast could see 30 to 80 millimeters of rainfall. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 20 degrees Celsius, Daegu topping out at 22 degrees. Then rain is expected in Seoul tomorrow through lunchtime, followed by another band of rain next Monday morning. So please take the rainy weather into account and catch that spring moment while you can.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.